The coronavirus pandemic has disrupted our life in so many ways. Even for me, that I just started to talk in physical conference, all the conferences, all the physical one, all around the world has been canceled. And in this situation in life, you maybe can be sad. But from my perspective for life, we don't have time to be sad because life are so short. And because of that, we always need to think about how to create a good situations from a bad ones. And this is exactly what I've done when the coronavirus pandemic has started. Now we had a lot more time to spend at home. And the first thing that I've done is to rearrange my apartment. I moved everything, changed everything. I opened my sofa to a bed that sometimes I can sleep in my living room. The aquarium that didn't work for 5 years, I put some water and some fishes and everything to create a good mood to stay at home. And then came the first weekend that we can't go out anywhere. And I thought to myself, what I will do with all this free time. And I remember that several years ago, I created a pure CSS game, which is called Kill the Bird, that so many web developers all around the world loved it very much. And I thought to myself that in the last several years, I learned so many new tricks in CSS that now I can create a lot better one. But I needed an idea of what it will be about. And it was one of the most easiest ideas that I had in my life. Because if we are now living in the coronavirus pandemic time, why not to create the coronavirus game? And this is exactly what I've done. I created these pure CSS games. All the things that you're seeing here is done only while using CSS and HTML. Yes, for the CSS, I'm using CSS preprocessor. And even for the HTML, I'm using an HTML preprocessor. But all the logic of this game, like when I'm clicking on the button, and it's opening the pop-up, and when I'm clicking the close of the pop-up, all this logic is done without any single line of JavaScript. And when I will click the Save the World button, the play button of the game, it will hide the main navigation and will open the game frame itself. Even that logic is done only while using CSS and HTML. And when I will click on one of those viruses, they will be disappear, the score of the game will go up, and even that is done only while using CSS and HTML. And what about the countdown? No, really? Even the countdown is built only while using CSS. But before you writing a single line of code in your own project, you need to think about something that inspire you. And I don't know why I saw this code pen that was painted on Canvas HTML in the middle of 2019, even before the coronavirus pandemic. And these small creatures remind me a little bit the coronavirus creatures. And I needed to give a name for the game and to think about how to design the main navigation. And I don't know why I remember the Chicken Invaders game. And when you are thinking about inspiration, is not to create everything from nothing. Inspiration is to take other old ideas and to create from them something new, something else. And the first thing that I wanted to create in this project is to create this coronavirus creatures. And it's nice to see that this was my inspiration. In the end, I created something different and I loved it because this is more my creature. And then I needed to start to create the HTML of those coronavirus creatures. But when I'm thinking about HTML, it's not just throwing HTML element to an HTML document. No, this is an object of coronavirus and I need to create it very precisely. And I created this label HTML element with the class of coronavirus, and I put it inside input type radio. And you may ask why I'm using here label HTML element and why there is an input type radio inside. This is part of the logic that we will talk about it a little bit later. But all the visual part of the virus that you are seeing here are starting in its own body. Inside the body, we have the 12 hairs and his both eyes. But from the beginning, I saw that I have a lot of repetition in my code, like creating all those 12 errors. And in the real game, I have 100 viruses, and I didn't want to copy paste them one by one. And I needed a way to solve this problem. And for that, in my first time in life, I'm using an HTML preprocessor, which is called Pug, that give us possibilities to create a repetition and some variables, and to create the HTML in a lot more smarter way. And for the CSS, of course, I'm using the SAS preprocessor that I'm using in the last 10 years for every one of my projects. And now, instead of writing these 12 span HTML element of all this R1 until R12, I can do while loop with variables and to create them dynamically. And yes, as you can see here, Pug is written very different from regular HTML. It's being compiled to regular HTML, but when you are working with Pug, you cannot write half Pug and half HTML. And because of that, I needed to update all the HTML in my project to the new way of Pug of written. And yes, you need to get used to it, but all this project I was creating in 2 days in the weekend, and I was learning Pug. Meanwhile, I was creating this project. If I done all of this in 2 days in the weekend, everyone can learn Pug. It's not so hard. And now I wanted to start to paint the coronavirus creature. I started in the body of the coronavirus creature. I gave it position relative. Why position relative? Because all the inner parts need to be according to its body, the eyes and the hairs. Width and height 100 pixel, background color black, and to get the circle shape, just gave it border radius of 50%. To create all of the eyes and to select the two classes of I1 and I2 together, I'm using here the attribute selector with the star character. And in the same way, give it width and height, little bit different, background color white, and border radius 50%. Because the width and the height are a little bit different, I'm getting the egg shape that is nice to get. And to locate these both eyes, I gave them position absolute from the top 25%, the left eye from the left 25%, the right eye from the right 25%, and little bit rotating inside with the rotated Z value in the transform property. To create the inner part of the eyes without adding another HTML element, I'm using here the before pseudo element. I gave it in the same way, width, height of 8 pixel, background color black, and border radius 50%. And if you are seeing what I did until now is just created circles, circles, and circles. To create the hairs of the coronavirus and to select all the classes between R1 until R12, again, I'm using here the attribute selector with the star character. In this way, I'm selecting all the classes between R1 until R12, and every one of those hairs is created from two boxes with the before and after pseudo element. The after pseudo element is the root of there, and the crown of there, I done it with the before pseudo element, another box that I'm putting up above. And as you can see, it has the circle shape. How I'm doing it, again, border radius of 50%. To locate this, to locate all those hair, I gave them position absolute in first and put them in the middle and the center of the virus, exactly in here. And now, one by one, with the transform property, I'm moving them according all around the coronavirus creature. There, one getting the transform property with a rotate Z value of 0 degrees, and only then the translate Y value of minus 65 pixel that take the hair from the middle to the top. But the second hair need to be top, but little bit to the right. How I'm doing it? The hair too will get a transform property, but now it rotates Z value of 30 degree, and only then the translate Y value with a value of minus 65 pixel. And in this way, the hair is going top, but little bit to the right. If you didn't know, the order of the value in the transform property is very important because it's affecting each other. And in this way, I just located all the hairs around the coronavirus creature. As you can see here, different rotate Z value and the same translate Y value. But as you can see here, we have a lot of repetition in our code, and we as web developers don't love to create repetition. How we can do it in another way? In SAS, we have the SAS for loop. And in this way, I can create all these location dynamically. And what I'm doing here, creating SAS variable of start position, and I gave it a value of 0 degrees. And then I created the SAS for loop with another SAS variable with the name of I that is going dynamically between 1 to 12. And in every iteration, it's creating me dynamically the selector between R1 until R12. And in the same iteration, the start position is getting bigger by 30 degrees. And I'm just putting the SAS variable of start position inside the rotate Z value. And in this way, I just created you now this CSS. Nice. But I wanted this creature to feel a lot more alive. But because every one of the hair have a different location with the transform property, I needed to create 12 different animations. And because I didn't want to create them one by one, I created them dynamically in the same for loop that located me all the hairs around the coronavirus creature. But I wanted to add some more animation for the eyes, and I added two animations, one for the inner part of the eyes, and I wanted to create the effects that the eyes are getting closed. How I'm doing it? I added another pseudo element, the after pseudo element, that it's a box with a width of 100%, height of a 0 pixel, and background color black. And you don't see it, but every 5 seconds in the animation, in the last half second, is getting a height of 100%. And in this way, the eyes are getting closed. But now let's talk about the most interesting stuff, how all this logic of this game is working. The first thing that you need to understand is how to create all the frames that I have in my own game. And let's take a look again on the game and understand how many frames I have in this game. The first frame that I'm seeing right now is the main navigation frame, and this is our first frame. When I will click on the How to Play button, it will open a pop-up, the How to Play pop-up, and this is our second frame in the game. The third frame is when I will click in the Who Am I button. In the same way, another pop-up, and this is our third frame in this game. The last frame that I have in this game is when I will click the Save the World button, it will hide the main navigation frame itself and will open us the game frame itself. And this is our last 4 frame that I have in this specific game. And now we need to represent it in the HTML. How I'm representing it? I'm just creating 4 separated section HTML element. And as you can see by the class name and by the ID names, the first one is the game menu frame. The second one is the game frame itself. The third one is the pop-up of the Who Am I? And the last one is the pop-up of the How to Play. But when I'm loading the game, I want to see only the game menu frame. I don't want to see all the other frames. How I'm hiding all the other frames? In a very easy way that everyone knows. I'm just giving all the other frames display none. And in this way, I'm just seeing now only the game menu frame. But now I need to create some flags that will tell me if something is open or something is closed. How can I create some flags without using any JavaScript? In the form elements that we have in HTML, we have the input with a type of checkbox. And if you are thinking about checkboxes, they are like flags, or false, unchecked, or true if they are checked. And this is exactly what I'm adding in the beginning of the HTML document. I created 3 checkboxes, and as you can see, every one of them is doing a specific thing. The first one with the ID of toggle game, if it's unchecked, please show me the game menu frame. If it's checked, show me the game frame, but hide me the game menu frame. The 2 others are even more simple. This one with the idea of how to play pop-up, when it's unchecked, don't show me the how to play pop-up. If it's checked, please show me the how to play pop-up. The third one, in the same way, with the idea of Who Am I pop-up, if it's unchecked, don't show me the Who Am I pop-up. And if it's checked, please show me the Who Am I pop-up. But those are just checkboxes that I'm putting in the beginning of the HTML document with opacity of 0, and you are not seeing them. Now we need a way to trigger those checkboxes without clicking on them specific. How can we do it? For that, I'm using a kind of another trick. The button that you saw in the main navigation are not button HTML element. Instead, I'm using label HTML element. And label HTML element can be triggered to any checkbox that you want with the for attribute. As you can see here, the button of the Save the World button is a label button, is connected with the for attribute to the first input type of checkbox with the idea of toggle game. You see toggle game, toggle game. And if I will click this label, it will trigger this checkbox and it will change the status from unchecked to check. If you will click it again, it will change the status from checked to unchecked, and it will change as many times that you will clicking on it. The same way for the 2 other buttons of the How to Play and the Who Am I, every one of them will change its own checkbox. But this is just changing the status of checkbox from unchecked to check or from checked to unchecked. Now we need to use this status to show or hide other frames of the game. How I'm doing that? I'm using 2 CSS features for that. we have the check pseudo class. And in this way, I can see if there is a specific checkbox in a status of checked. And if there is a specific checkbox in status of checked, I can use the sibling selector that can select me any sibling element that I want. And in this way, I can give it display block, display none, and in this way, I can hide or show any frames that I want to be show or hide in this game. And this is exactly what I'm doing in the real game. For example, when I'm clicking on the How to Play button, it will trigger the checkbox with the ID of How to Play pop-up, and this will change the status of this checkbox to checked. And now this selector is starting to work for us. And if this checkbox is in status of checked, go to the sibling element with the ID of How to Play and put it with display block. And now this pop-up is now open. Nice. But now you need to ask yourself another question. How I'm closing the pop-up? And again, this is the same idea. This specific pop-up, the X button and the close button are now not button HTML element. Again, I'm using here label HTML element. And these both buttons, the X button and the close button, are label HTML element that again are being connected to the same checkbox with the idea of How to Play pop-up. And when this pop-up is open, this means that this checkbox is in status of checked. But when you click on the X button or the close button, this will trigger this input of checkbox, and it will change the status from checked to unchecked. And now the pop-up is being closed again. But now you need to ask yourself another question. What is happening when I'm clicking the Save the World button, the play button of the game? When I'm clicking on this specific button, it's doing two operations instead of one. First, it's hiding the main navigation, and then it's showing the game frame itself. How can I do two operations instead of one? And it's really the same idea if you're thinking about it. The checkbox with the idea of toggle game, if you are in status of checked, first go to the game menu frame and give it display none, and then go to the game frame and give it display block. And in this way, you can use the status of the checkbox and to do as many operations that you want. This way of written is, of course, written with SAS. It's a lot more readable to do it in SAS, but of course, you can do it in two separated CSS selectors. But now let's talk about one of the most amazing tricks that I have in this game. When I'm clicking those viruses, they are being disappear and the score of the game is going up. Let's talk about these two tricks that we have here. In the beginning of the talk, I told you that every coronavirus creature is wrapped with a label HTML element with class of coronavirus. And inside I have an input type radio. But I also told you that all the visual part of the virus are starting in the div with the class of body. Inside the body, we have the eyes and the hairs, and of course the body itself. And in the real game, I'm doing animation on the label HTML element. And in this way, it's taking all the visual part of the virus on the screen. But when you are clicking on those visual part of the virus, because it's wrapped with the label HTML element, it's like you are clicking on the label HTML element. And because the input is inside, you don't need even the for attribute. It will automatically trigger it. Because of that, I'm clicking on this coronavirus creature. It's triggering the label HTML elements that triggering the input type radio that we have inside. And this will change its status from unchecked to checked. And this status is telling us that the virus is being dead. And now we need to use this status to hide the visual part of the virus. How I'm doing it, I'm creating a CSS selector of input type radio. If you are in status of checked, go to the sibling element with the div with class of body and just give it opacity of 0. And in this way, when I'm clicking those viruses, they are being disappear. But now we need to create the CSS score. How I'm doing it? For that, I'm using the CSS counter. In order to it to work correctly, it needs to be declared before all those input type radio. Because of that, I just declare it on the body HTML element. In this way, on the body HTML element, I'm creating the property of counter reset, and I gave it any name that I want. I gave it the name Corona. And now I need to count all those dead viruses. Input type radio, if you are in status of checked, counter increment me the corona value that we created here. And now we need to print the total score to the screen, and we need to create a place to summarize the score. It needs to be defined in the HTML after all those input type radio that we have in our own game to work, that it will work correctly. And I created here the div class sum. And I'm selecting the class I'm in the CSS with the after pseudo element. I'm using here the content property, and the content property can get the CSS counter function that can get the corona value that we incremented here and created here. And in this way, it's always listening and printing to the screen the total score. Because it's a very complicated example, I want to show you that in real code. And let's see this live code pen. As you can see here, there are 5 viruses without the eyes and the hairs. The eyes and the hair are inside the body here in the real game. And you can even see the input type radio that we have inside only for this example. All the visual part of the virus is the div class body, and this is the big black circle. And in the bottom, I have a place to summarize the total score. As you can see, the text score is coming from the HTML, but the numbers are coming from the CSS. On the body, I'm creating the CSS counter with the counter reset property, and I gave it the name Corona. On the input type radio, if you're in status of checked, counter incrementing the Corona value that we created on the top. Beside of it, if the input type radio is in status of checked, go to the sibling element with class of body and just give it, opacity of 0. And in this way, when this checkbox is checked, the body is being vanished from the screen. And to summarize the total score, I'm using here the after pseudo element and calling the content property with the CSS counter function that I'm putting inside the corona value that we incremented here and created here. Let's see that it really works. I will click, and you can see even that the radio button is being checked. And in this way, you are creating pure CSS score for a pure CSS game. One of the most amazing tricks to create pure CSS games. Okay, now let's continue for another amazing trick. How can we create CSS countdown, pure CSS countdown? As you can see in the HTML, the numbers that you are seeing on the screen are not coming from the HTML. They are coming from the CSS. They are coming from an animation that I'm doing on the content property. But that you will understand exactly what you are seeing right now, these are 2 strings that I'm doing on the animation. This is the before and after pseudo element of this span HTML element with class of count. That you will understand what you are seeing right now, I will press here the 2 letters of AA, and you will see that these numbers aren't connected. They are just looking like they are connected. Let's reset the animation, and I will explain you what you are seeing exactly. On the class of count, I'm using in the before pseudo element. In the content property, I'm doing animation to the content property. I'm calling the animation of countdown, this animation, and I'm telling it to work for 100 seconds and 1 iteration. And because I have here exactly 10 frames, every 10 seconds it will go 1 number down and another one. This is the first value, yes? And after 100 seconds, it will stuck on the 0 value because I put it here, the forwards keyword value that telling the animation to stuck on the last frame of the animation. The second value, I'm calling the same animation, but in a different way. I'm telling it to work for 10 seconds and 10 iteration. Because 10 seconds and 10 frames, every 1 second, it will go 1 number down and another one. And after 10 seconds, it will do it again for another 9 iteration because I told it to work 10 iteration in total of 10 iteration. And after all these 40 seconds, it will stuck on the last frame of 0 because again, I put here the forwards keyword value that we have in CSS animation that telling the animation to be stuck on the last frame of the animation. Nice trick. Now let's talk about how we can create random stuff in CSS. Before I will show you exactly the example, I want to show you why I wanted to create random stuff in my own project. When I created this project, I wanted to create that the coronavirus will be in random places on the screen. Every coronavirus has 6 randomized locations. Even the scale of them, the size, is being randomized. Even the rotation is being randomized. But wait a minute, how we can create random stuff in CSS? We can't, but we can do it with Sass. Because it's very important example, first I want to show you the real code. In the real game, I have 100 viruses and I needed to create 100 different animation. Because I didn't want to create them one by one, I done them with a Sass for loop that is running 100 iteration. And this keyframe is being randomized for 100 times, being created 100 times. And in every one of the times, every virus has 6 different locations. And in the translate y-axis, I'm using the SAS random function that randomizes me a value between 1 to 80, and I just doubling it in 1VH. I'm using it even for the scale and even for the rotation. That you understand exactly how it works, let's see again another live example. Here let's compile the HTML. You can see that it's very regular HTML, 6 empty HTML element. The numbers that you are seeing here is coming from the CSS. Here in the SAS code, I'm using the for loop that is running 6 iteration, creating me dynamic the CSS selector that is between class 1 until class 6. And inside with the before pseudo element on the content property, on the string of the content property, I'm using inside the SAS random function that randomizes me a value between 1 to 80, and I'm just doubling it in 1VH, and all those values are being randomized. For you to believe me that it's really random values, let's create some change in the SAS code. I will press enter, and you will see that the values are being changed again and again, as many times that I will click on it. And that you will understand exactly what is happening when it's being compiled to CSS. Let's see the compiled CSS code, just regular CSS code. Of course, that these numbers will be randomized. You need to compile the SAS every time that it will be randomized, will bring us randomized values. Okay. And now let's talk about when we are finished the game, we have this game over curtain. And I want to create that the button that will bring us again to the back to main menu, that we can play the game again and again and again. This specific button is not a label HTML element. Instead, I'm using here an input with type of reset. Because in the beginning, I understand that if I want to create that I can play this game again and again and again, I need to reset all the status of all those radio button and all those checkboxes. And for that, I just wrapped all the HTML element with the form HTML element. And in this way, when I'm clicking this button, it's reset me all the input of checkboxes, all the radio button, and this brings me automatically again to the main navigation, and I can play this game again and again and again. And the last trick, how can I know exactly when to put the game over curtain? And this is one of the most easiest tricks. Everyone knows that animation can get animation duration, but sometimes we forget that we have the animation delay property. And in this way, I can tell the animation of the game over curtain to load after 99 seconds. In this example, I just put here 5 seconds, that we don't need to wait for 99 seconds. And let's see that it really works. Let's refresh the screen and we'll count together between 1 to 5. I will refresh the screen. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Game over. Nice. Okay, we saw here a lot of CSS tricks that with them you can create pure CSS games. And you maybe think that this is the main takeaways that I want you to take from this talk, but it isn't. The most important takeaway that I want you to take from this talk is to create any project that you want. It can be in CSS, it can be in JavaScript, anything that you can do it code. And why it's so important to create any project for fun? Why it's so important to create projects for fun? We as a web developer and as a people and persons, we're starting to forget that the best way to learn new stuff is by playing. In the animal kingdom, where there are small kittens, they are like hunting each other. They are like hunting, but they are enjoying. And in this way, they are learning how to hunt. And we as adults, we are forgetting that this is the best way to learn new stuff. And if you are creating your own project, in the end, you will be a better web developer and you have fun. And if you are getting to be a better web developer, you will get a better salary. And even that is important, because the most important thing is to have fun. Create any project that you want for fun. And believe me, this is the most fun thing that you can do, and enjoy your own life. And before we finish, my friends, if you want to see more of my stuff, you can find them in these social networks. And my friends, I am Elad Shechter, and thank you very much for listening.